All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of Henry David Thoreau.
Oh, yeah, I love Thoreau.
Yeah, he's a pretty fascinating guy, right? Born back in 1817, died in 1862.
Yeah.
And, really kind of a champion for this idea of civil disobedience. And I think he's left a pretty undeniable mark on, environmentalism as a whole.
I think that's right.
So, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with at least his name and maybe some of his most famous works like Civil Disobedience. That was back in 1849.
Right.
And then, of course, his, real deep dive into simple living with Walden or Life in the Woods.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites.
Yeah, that was published in 1854. So.
And for this deep dive, you've provided some amazing material. It's not just those famous works. You know, we've got excerpts from some of his other essays, even more from Walden, and these really insightful pieces from his journals and letters.
Oh, yeah. I thought those would be really valuable for, really kind of getting into his headspace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this.
Yeah, so we're going to try to, distill his core perspectives. I think there's three main areas that we really want to focus on today.
Sounds good.
Solitude, his relationship with society, and then ultimately how the individual fits into the larger world.
Right, let's do it.
Now, I know you like to get right to the heart of the matter,
I do. I like to be efficient.
No waste of time, right?
Yep.
So we're gonna unpack these ideas pretty thoroughly here.
Okay.
Extract the most valuable insights. I think we've got some really interesting stuff to cover and hopefully some, surprising takeaways for our listeners.
I think so.
So why don't we start with a concept that I think is pretty central to Thoreau's life and his thought, and that's this idea of the profound value of solitude.
Right.
So he famously stated, "I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time. To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude."
It's so fascinating how relevant that statement feels even today. We're constantly connected, bombarded by information and social media and all this stuff. And Thoreau's idea that you can find something companionable in solitude. I mean, that really resonates with me, and I think a lot of people probably feel that need sometimes to unplug.
Absolutely.
Just find some mental breathing room.
Yeah.
And, his experience at Walden Pond, he was there for 2 years, starting on July 4th, 1845. That was deliberate.
Yeah.
Right? He wanted to create that space for himself.
Yeah, he was stepping away from the busyness to seek clarity.
Exactly.
And I think it's important to note that his understanding of solitude went beyond just, being physically separated from people.
Right.
In Walden, he wrote, "We are for the most part more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers. A man thinking or working is always alone. Let him be where he will." So it's more about the, mental and intellectual space we cultivate for ourselves even when we're around other people.
That's a really crucial distinction.
Yeah.
And we see this reflected in his journals, too. He wrote, "Friends, they are like bubbles in the water hurrying to flow together."
Yeah.
You get this sense of the ephemeral nature of human connection, even with those closest to us. It's interesting to contrast that with the more constant relationship he seemed to have with his own thoughts and with nature.
Right.
But he also wrote, "I would fain forever be attended by a cheerful genius, such as nature grants to the poor and contented."
Yeah, so it's not that he was, completely against human companionship, but it seems like he found a different kind of presence in nature, something more enduring and uplifting.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and it almost seems like, he sensed a kind of superficiality in a lot of human interactions.
Yeah, and there's that famous quote from Walden where he says, "I had 3 chairs in my house. 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society."
I love that quote.
Yeah, me too. It paints such a vivid picture of his priorities.
It really does. Solitude as the foundation friendship, obviously valued, but maybe less frequent. Right. And society, something to engage with very intentionally.
I think to understand this perspective a bit more, we should touch on his transcendentalist beliefs.
Okay.
So I know you like to get to the core of things. So to put it simply, transcendentalism emphasizes that truth isn't found in institutions or traditions, but through individual intuition and experience in the natural world. It's about a spiritual understanding that transcends the purely material.
So for Thoreau, it sounds like he believed that the answers weren't in established doctrines, but within himself and the world around him.
Yeah, exactly. And his retreat to Walden makes even more sense in that context.
It really does. And of course, we can't talk about transcendentalism without mentioning Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right. Emerson had a huge influence on Thoreau's thinking, particularly his emphasis on individualism and personal freedom.
Yeah. In that essay, Self-Reliance from 1841 that you shared with me, there's that quote that really stood out to me.
Which one?
where he says, "There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide."
It's a powerful statement, isn't it?
It's like he's saying, cut through all the noise and find your own way. Don't try to be someone else.
Thoreau definitely took that to heart.
He did. And building on this idea of individualism, he had a pretty strong critique of conformity and societal expectations.
Right.
In Walden, he observed that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation.
It's a pretty bleak assessment of what he saw around him.
Yeah, and it's this idea that so many people are living unfulfilled lives and they don't even realize it.
Exactly.
And this really connects to his views on possessions and the pursuit of luxury.
Right. He was very critical of that.
He famously said, most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only not indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind.
It's so relevant today, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, think about our obsession with upgrades and the latest gadgets.
Yeah.
He saw those things as actively holding us back from something more meaningful.
And he believed that by simplifying our lives, reducing our dependence on material things, we could gain so much more.
Yeah.
More time for reflection, mental clarity, a deeper connection to ourselves and the natural world.
It's almost the opposite of how most people think.
It is. It's countercultural for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting he even contrasted his view of self-sufficient or fairly compensated labor as, deeply fulfilling, almost transcendental, with what later became known as Marx's theory of alienation.
Right, where industrial work can disconnect people from the value and meaning of their labor.
Yeah.
For Thoreau, his time at Walden was partly an experiment to rediscover those fundamental human needs like shelter, food, community, but on his own terms, free from societal pressures.
He was getting to the essence of what it means to be human.
That's a good way to put it.
And he had some really powerful observations about this. He said, men and boys are learning all kinds of trades, but how to make themselves men.
Yeah, and that other quote, what is the use of a house if you don't have a decent planet to put it on?
Man, that is so relevant for our time, isn't it?
It is. It shows a real awareness of something much larger than just individual concerns.
It really does. And it highlights his, surprisingly modern environmental consciousness.
Absolutely.
So his critique of society wasn't just about individual fulfillment, but also about our collective responsibility to the natural world.
Exactly. And this leads us to another really important part of Thoreau's legacy, his ideas on civil disobedience and resistance to the state.
Yeah, that's a big one.
His famous essay on this, which was originally titled Resistance to Civil Government, but later became widely known as civil disobedience. That came out of a very specific context. His opposition to the Mexican-American War.
Right.
He saw it as an attempt to expand slavery, and it led him to refuse to pay a poll tax, which landed him in jail for a short time in June of 1848.
Yeah, and his main argument in that essay is so compelling. It's this tension between individual conscience and the demands of the government.
Right.
He said, that government is best which governs least. And then he went even further saying that government is best which governs not at all.
That's pretty radical.
It is, but it comes from this deep belief that our moral obligation trumps our obligation to the state.
He argued that we should be men first and subjects afterward, meaning our commitment to what we believe is right should always come before simply following the law.
Yeah, and he really put it eloquently when he said, the only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And, he wasn't afraid to go against the majority if his conscience told him to.
He famously said, any man more right than his neighbors constitutes a majority of one.
Yeah, and then there's that line, under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison.
That's a powerful indictment of a system that allows injustice.
It is. And the impact of civil disobedience is pretty amazing. I mean, it became a key text for people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr.
It really did.
Yeah.
And it shows the practical power of his ideas as a strategy for nonviolent resistance.
Yeah, this wasn't just abstract philosophy for him. It was a guide for action. And it's interesting, even something like voting, which we usually think of as a civic duty, Thoreau is very critical of.
He had a different perspective on it, for sure.
He said, all voting is sort of gaming, like checkers or backgammon with a slight moral tinge to it, playing with right and wrong with moral questions, and betting naturally accompanies it.
So it sounds like he felt voting wasn't enough on its own. You have to be living your values and working for justice in your everyday life.
Yeah, it was about more than just casting a ballot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So we've talked about solitude and his views on society, But we also need to talk about his connection to nature and his engagement with Eastern philosophy.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating aspect of his life.
Walden is obviously a testament to his love of nature.
Yeah.
And he was a really keen observer. He actually made some contributions to our understanding of ecology with his studies of things like seed dispersal and forest regeneration.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And beyond his direct observations of nature, he was also really drawn to non-Western spiritual traditions, particularly the Bhagavad Gita and the Code of Manu.
Yeah, he had some really interesting things to say about those texts.
He did. He wrote, "Whenever I read any part of the Vedas, I feel that some unsearchable and subtle light dawns upon me."
Yeah, and he compared the Bhagavad Gita to the brilliance of a higher and purer luminary.
That's beautiful imagery.
It is. It seems like he found a real source of wisdom in those texts.
He did. And it wasn't just an academic interest. It really influenced his own spiritual development.
Yeah, he even said about the Hindu scriptures, "I cannot read a sentence in the book of the Hindus without being elevated upon the tableland of the Ghats."
That's such a vivid image.
It is. Like he's being lifted to a higher plane of understanding.
Exactly. And he saw them as timeless, too.
Yeah, untouched by history.
And maybe most tellingly, he referred to himself as a yogi in one of his letters,
Oh, wow.
which really shows his personal connection to Eastern contemplative practices.
So it wasn't just intellectual, it was a lived experience for him.
It's fascinating how these different influences, American transcendentalism and ancient Eastern philosophy, came together in his worldview.
Yeah, it's really unique.
It is. Now, to wrap things up, I think we need to go back to his core motivation, this idea of living deliberately.
Oh.
He famously wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die discover that I had not lived."
That's the heart of Walden right there.
It is. It's about being intentional, stripping away distractions, and focusing on what truly matters.
And that led to his famous call to simplify, simplify.
Exactly.
Huh.
Not about deprivation, but about freeing up time and energy for more meaningful things.
And there's that other great quote, "If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with the success unexpected in common hours."
It's so hopeful and inspiring.
It is. It's about trusting your own path and seeing where it leads.
And he ends with this beautiful perspective on living in the present moment. "Only that day dawns to which we are awake. There is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star." It's a reminder that each day is full of potential, but we have to be present to experience it.
So to sum up our deep dive into Thoreau, we've explored his love of solitude, his belief in the importance of individual conscience, his advocacy for simple living, and his call to live deliberately.
And even though these ideas are from the 19th century, they're still so relevant today.
They are, especially for, people who are interested in gaining knowledge and having those aha moments.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought for you all to consider. What's one area of your life where you could benefit from some intentional solitude? Or maybe where you feel called to resist external pressures and follow your own convictions? What might you discover about yourself? And what parts of your true self might you reclaim?
That's something for everyone to think about.
It is. We encourage you to explore Thoreau's work further. There's always more to learn.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
All right, take care.
You too.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.